Morning guys, David here from the Back Pain and Functional Movement Training Centre and City Coast Neurosurgery. Today I just wanted to talk to you about biomechanical studies that are assessing the loads and forces on our spine, because I think a lot of people will base their understanding and their reasoning for spine injuries or spinal injury and back pain on the data that they get from biomechanical studies. And although the information that we learn from biomechanical studies on cadaveric spines is very valuable, we can't extrapolate 100% of the information that we get from a spinal research on a cadaver in contrast to a human being. Let me explain why. So what happens when we do biomechanical studies, in particular in relation to the forces and pressure within the disc, this structure here, in between the bones, the lumbar discs, and also on the facet joints of the spine, which is this structure here. We put the spine or the cadaver into a device that holds it into a certain position, and then we put pressure transducers either in the disc space or across the facet joints, and we measure tension or load with the spine under various compression and angles of flexion and extension, whether that be in the sagittal plane or whether that be in the transverse plane or whether it be under some sort of axial loading, rotational loading. And then what we would gather from that is the positions which may identify harmful forces that are being absorbed or taken by the spinal integrity. And then we extrapolate from that and say, all right, well, if we see that the spine in hyperextension causes excessive loading on the facet joint, then maybe we shouldn't load in an extended position. Or likewise, if we see that the spine is, the spinal lumbar disc is under a lot of pressure in this sort of rolled or non-neutral flex position, then that may be indicative of a harmful type of movement or body position that can then cause structural breakdown, pain and disability. So the most important concept, though, that this type of study ignores is the fact that when we move our spine, there is a element of stress shielding that is continuously, in a way, trying to protect the spine. And I've been trying to get my head around how to explain that to people, and to try to make the interpretation of biomechanical studies more precise. And this is the model that I've used. So let's imagine now that we have that this represents the muscular belt, for want of a better term, that surrounds our spine. So if I put this spine into this muscular belt and then move the spine any which way, okay, whether I'm extending in these what we would normally think are unfavourable positions, or whether I'm flexing in unfavourable positions. If I maintain a very healthy, high functional capacity, robust muscular belt that surrounds my spine, it really offsets any of that biomechanical data that we obtained when we did the testing without the muscular belt. Okay, because this is going to behave like a stress shield. Okay, so that is one of the key concepts that we have to get our head around, is when we're talking about movement proficiency, and that is, what is the functional capacity of your muscular belt? Because if we argue that rounding is bad for your spine, or maintaining neutral positions is good for your spine, then we are actually missing the point. So we can move our spine in forward bending like so, or we can move our spine in forward bending like so, right? And a lot of discussion happens around between two camps of thought, two schools of thought, as to whether this should be the teaching or whether this should be the teaching, because both schools of thought argue different concepts, and really what we're all ignoring is the fact that it's not really about the biomechanics in isolation. It's about the biomechanics when you've got this muscular belt that exists at all times around our spine during our movement, and not just the spinal erectors, but also the anterior abdominal wall that acts like an airbag that supports this movement as well. So there's not just the spinal, it's not just the psoas muscles and the muscles that surround directly the spine, but also our pelvic floor, our diaphragm, our anterior abdominal wall are all part of this muscular belt. And so therefore, if I have a high functional capacity, then I am protected regardless of whether I move like that or whether I move like this. Okay? Now, my recommendation or my advice to patients is that when you're in a position of poor health with back pain, we need to develop the functional capacity of that muscular belt. And in the process of developing that functional capacity of that muscular belt, if I advocate this type of movement like that, then my muscular belt doesn't yet have the capacity to protect the spinal integrity in those non-neutral positions. Okay? Whereas if I encourage people to move with biomechanical neutral positions of the spine, biomechanically that decreases the biomechanical stress on each individual motion segment. And when I decrease the biomechanical stress on each individual motion segment, my muscular belt isn't challenged as much as it would be if I move like that. Okay, so as I continue to move like this, day in, day out, 16, 18 hours a day, really focusing on that being my default type of movement, whereby I'm maintaining a neutral spine, I'm engaging my posterior kinetic chain, which is this structure here. I'm focusing on hip-centric rotation, so pretending that I'm now a back pain patient with poor functional capacity, pain and disability. I don't have a very healthy muscular belt, so it makes 100% sense to me and logically move with biomechanical move with biomechanical proficiency that makes that not have to work too hard, because if I start to move poorly, I'm suddenly calling upon my functional capacity to support my joints in biomechanically less efficient positions, and that's going to continue to drive inflammation and structural breakdown and pain and stop me from healing. Whereas if I do the exact opposite, okay, I'm being taught move well, develop my functional capacity in the process of moving well, because of course as I'm moving well with those points of performance that I just described, as I continue to move well day in and day out with those nice neutral positions, okay, now my functional capacity, this muscular belt is getting stronger, okay. In 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, whatever the case may be, if I then start to move in a slightly less optimal rounded position biomechanically, that is a more mechanically stressful position for the spinal integrity. But because I have this muscular belt now developed on a foundation of good proficient movement, it doesn't really matter that I have moved poorly on the odd occasion, and I'm being hypothetical when I refer to the word odd occasion. So because I have a high functional capacity, it's not going to hurt me as I move poorly to pick up this object, okay? It's not going to hurt me to pick up this object poorly. But it's just natural, though, that because my movement patterns are trained to maintain good positions, I just move like that all the time. And as I do that, I'm building capacity every second of every day. And if I choose to do some specific training to build my capacity more than I would through daily life activities, say, for instance, I started picking up a barbell or a kettlebell, and I started swinging the kettlebell like this, of course maintaining nice proficiency with my neutral spine positions, which is non-conjectural in the strength and conditioning industry, that we want to keep these positions. We never tell people to swing a kettlebell with a rounded back, because we know that that's injurious. But it seems like when it comes to daily life activities, people say it's okay. Some people say it's okay to round, and it sort of is okay to round, but they're missing the point. You've got to build the capacity first. So now, if I wanted to, for whatever reason, I could say, all right, now I've got the capacity. My muscular sleeve or the muscular belt that I was referring to, if I want to move poorly and round my back, I can do it. I don't have to do it. I don't really want to do it, but I can do it. And that's the mistake that people make when they say it's okay to round your back. It's got to be qualified. Does the individual have the capacity to move poorly? And I think a really simple way to conceptualize the whole discussion is you need to earn the right to move poorly. Okay, so in a way, move well as your default 80% of the time, develop that really high functional capacity, and then 20% of the time, if you happen to move poorly, you're going to be absolutely fine. But if you go out there and say, I'm in a really poor functional state, it's okay to move poorly, you're never going to develop the functional capacity that then protects you if you move badly, because you're then in a biomechanically prone position that's going to create more structural breakdown, biomechanical stress that causes structural breakdown, inflammation, pain, and disability. So, all right. Well, I think I've got that message across in a sort of reasonable explanation using these aids, but feel free to get in contact with us if it doesn't quite make sense to you, but hopefully it does. It's pretty simple when you think about it, and when you see hundreds, if not thousands of patients who have tried to rehabilitate with very mixed messages, and we've got to really be fundamental and scientific and biomechanical in our approach. You cannot just say it's okay to round your back, because that's not qualified by have you got the functional capacity, have you earned the privilege to round your back and be safe. Okay, so make proficient movement your default movement, which means neutral spine positions, hip-centric rotation, posterior kinetic chain activation. Avoid knee loading, okay, because that breaks the posterior kinetic chain, that takes the tension out of the posterior kinetic chain. And when you take the tension and conditioning out of the posterior kinetic chain, you then find it more difficult to maintain that nice neutral spine position, which is required to build that capacity up and then earning that privilege to occasionally round your back if you want to. Okay, thanks so much.